We slipped across the road like shadows and moved around the corner. The light from the showground reached even here, faintly but enough to make a difference. We stopped at its edge, feeling nervous. It was though a single step into that light would immediately make us visible to a whole army of hostile watchers. It was frightening. That was the first moment at which I started to realize what true courage was. Up till then, everything had been unreal, like a night stalking game at a school camp. To come out of the darkness now would be to show courage of a type that I'd never had to show before, never even known about. I had to search my own mind and body to find if there was a new part of me somewhere. I felt there was a spirit in me that could do this thing, but it was a spirit I hadn't known about. If I could only find it, I could connect with it, and then maybe, just maybe, I could start to defrost the fear that had frozen my body. Maybe I could do this dangerous and terrible thing. A small, single movement was my key to finding my spirit. There was a tree about 4 steps away in front of me and to my left, well inside the zone of light from the showground. I suddenly made myself leave the darkness and go into it. In 4 quick, light steps, a dance that surprised me, but made me feel a little lightheaded and proud. That's it, I thought. I've done it. It was a dance of courage. I felt then, and still feel now, that I was transformed by those 4 steps. At that moment, I stopped being an innocent rural teenager and started becoming someone else, a more complicated and capable person, a force to be reckoned with even, not just a polite, obedient kid. There wasn't time then to explore this new and interesting me, but I promised myself I'd do it later. I still felt lightheaded when Kevin, then Corrie, joined me moments later. We looked at each other and grinned, proud and excited and a little disbelieving. "Okay, what's next?" Kevin asked. Suddenly he was looking to me for directions. Maybe he recognized how I'd been changed in those few seconds. But then surely he had been too. "Keep heading left, from tree to tree. We need to get to that big gum. That'll put us opposite the woodchop area. We'll get a better view from there." I took off as soon as I'd finished speaking, so psyched up I didn't realize I was doing to Kevin what I objected to his doing to me moments earlier. From my new vantage point, I could see human movement. 3 men in uniforms emerged slowly from the shadows behind the grandstand and walked steadily around the perimeter of the wire fence. They carried weapons of some kind, big rifles maybe, but it was too far to see them clearly. Despite all the evidence that we'd had already, this was the first confirmation that an enemy army was in our country and in control. It was unbelievable, horrible. I felt my body fill with fear and anger. I wanted to yell at them to get out. I wanted to run away and hide. I couldn't take my eyes off them. After they'd faded out of sight again, behind the trotter stables, I heard the quick rush of light feet as Kevin and Corrie reached me. "Did you see the men?" I asked. "Well, yes and no," Corrie whispered. "They weren't all men. At least one was a woman." "Really? Are you sure?" She shrugged. "You want to know the color of their buttons?" I took her point. Corrie does have good eyesight. We kept going, making our little dashes from tree to tree, until at last we were gathered, panting behind the big river gum. From there we peered out cautiously. Corrie, kneeling, looking around the base from the right, Kevin, crouching, looking through a low fork, and me, standing on the other side, peeping around the trunk. We were in quite a good spot, about 60 meters from the fence, and able to see a third of the showground. The first thing I noticed was a number of big tents on the oval. They were all different shapes and colors, but they were all big. The second thing was another couple of soldiers, with weapons, standing on the trotting track. They weren't doing anything, just standing, one facing the tents and one facing the pavilions. It was obvious they were sentries, guarding whatever was in the tents probably. One was a woman too. Corrie had been right. The showground was still set up for the show, even though it should have been packed up 4 days ago. But the Ferris wheels and sideshows, the tractor displays and caravans, the logs for the wood chop and the trailers selling fast foods, all were still in position. Away to our left was a silent ocean of parked cars, most sitting like dark, still animals, a few glinting in the artificial light. Our car would be among them somewhere. Some cars would have had dogs in them, too. I tried not to think about their horrible deaths, like the dogs back at our place. Maybe the soldiers had compassion and had rescued them when the fighting was over. Maybe there would have been time for that. We watched for 8 minutes, I was timing it, before anything happened. Just as Kevin leaned around the trunk and whispered to me, "We'll have to go," and I nodded, a man came out of one of the tents. He walked out with his hands on his head and stood there. Immediately the sentries came to life, one of them going quickly to the man, the other straightening up and turning to look at him. The sentry and the man talked for a few moments. Then the man, still with his hands on his head, walked to the toilet block and disappeared inside. It was only at the last second, as the light above the lavatory door shone on his face, that I recognized him. It was Mr. Coles, my Year 4 teacher at the Wirrawee Primary. So at last we knew. A coldness crept through me. I felt the goosebumps prickle on my skin. This was the new reality of our lives. I got the shakes a bit, but there was no time for that. We had to go. We slid backwards through the grass and began to retrace our tracks from tree to tree. I remembered from a couple of years ago a big controversy when the council had wanted to cut these trees down to make a bigger car park. There'd been such an outcry that they had to give up the idea. I grinned to myself in the darkness, but without humour. Thank God the good guys had won. But no one could ever have imagined how useful those trees were going to be to us. I got to the last tree and patted its trunk gently. I felt a great affection for it. Corrie was right behind me, then Kevin snuck in. "Nearly home free," I said, and set off again. I should have touched wood once more before I did. The moment I showed my nose, a clatter of gunfire started up behind me. Bullets zinged past, chopping huge chunks of wood out of the tree to my left. I heard a gasp from Corrie and a cry from Kevin. It was though I left the ground with sheer fear. For a moment I lost contact with the earth. It was a strange feeling, like I had ceased to be. Then I was diving at the corner of the road, rolling through the grass and wriggling like an earwig into cover. At once I turned to yell to Kevin and Corrie, but as I did they landed on top of me, knocking the wind out of me. "Go like stink," Kevin said, pulling me up. "They're coming!"